Hey everybody, it's Coach Chanae with Academic Coaching for Real Changers. I'm excited today to join you to talk about classical and operant conditioning. Before I get started, I want to remind you, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel or join us on Facebook group Academic Coaching for Real Changers. You can find us also on our website, www.academiccoachingforrealchangers.com. We are here to support you and help you to prepare to take and pass your exam. We really want you to be one and done. We do not want you to be paying to take the test again and again and again. Instead, we want to help you learn the material so you can pass your test and become licensed. Like I mentioned, today we're going to talk about classical and operant conditioning. These two concepts come from behavioral therapy. If you're unsure what behavior therapy is, be sure to check out our YouTube page. We have videos on there where it explains this concept, or you can also book a private session with the coach to learn about it more in depth. You can find more information about our coaches at our website, academiccoachingforworldchangers.com. So, back to classical and operant conditioning, the result is really about learning. Both of these concepts are based on the underlying assumption that a subject, which can be a person or an animal, can adapt to their environment. It's the process to get to that point that differentiates the two. Classical conditioning belongs to Ivan Pavlov. It focuses on involuntary automatic behaviors. It involves placing a neutral signal before a reflex. I don't know if you remember, but you might remember learning about Pavlov's dogs in Psychology 101. In this experiment, Pavlov noticed that dogs began to salivate in response to a tone after the sound has been repeatedly paired with scenting food. Pavlov realized this was a learned response. Classical conditioning creates an association between a naturally existing stimulus and a previously neutral one. So, to break this down, let's use Pavlov's example. Classical conditioning process, it involves pairing a previously neutral stimulus, which would be, in this example, the sound of a bell, with an unconditioned stimulus, which is the taste of food. The unconditioned stimulus naturally and automatically triggers salivating to the response of the food. So this is known as the unconditioned response. So after you associate the neutral stimulus and the unconditioned stimulus, which is the sound of the bell, it will start to evoke the natural stimulus, which is the salivating. That is the response. So the sound of the bell known as the is now known as the conditioned stimulus, and the salivating in response to the bell is known as the conditioned response. So a dog does not need to be trained to salivate when it sees food. This occurs naturally. So the saliva is the naturally occurring stimulus. And so if you ring the bell every time you present the dog with the food, an association is formed between the food and the bell. So eventually the bell alone, the conditioned stimulus, would begin to evoke the salivation response. So now the conditioned response with the conditioned is the bell, and the natural response is the salivating. So eventually, the bell alone, the conditioned stimulus, would evoke the salivation response. So I just wanted to repeat that again so that you can be clear on what I'm saying. So Pavlov could teach a dog to salivate to the sound of a bell by going through classic conditioning. So that was a lot of information to process. You can go back and re-listen if you need to before moving on to hear about operant conditioning. Operant conditioning is from B.F. Skinner. Operant conditioning involves applying a reinforcement or punishment after a behavior. So the purpose is and the focus is to strengthen or weaken a voluntary behavior. So before I go further with talking about operant conditioning, for today's discussion, I'm just going to do a very broad overview. But to really dive deeper into reinforcement and punishment related to operant conditioning, there, there will be a release of a four-part mini-series to kind of explain in depth a bit more. So operant conditioning focuses on using either reinforcement or punishment to increase or decrease a behavior. Through this process, an association is formed between the behavior and the consequence. So, for example, if a teacher punishes a student for talking without raising their hand, and the punishment is that you cannot go out for recess, the student begins to form an association between the behavior and the consequence. The behavior in this example is talking without raising my hand, and the consequence is not being able to go outside for recess. So, as a result, the problematic behavior, which in this example is talking without raising your hand, the hope is that that behavior decreases. Again, listen to my other episodes to learn more about positive and negative reinforcement and punishment, as well as reinforcement schedules, because operant conditioning has a lot that goes along with it. I'm just giving an overview and touching on the surface. So, what's the difference between classical and operant conditioning? So, the difference is the focus on whether the behavior is involuntary or voluntary. The main difference between classical and operant conditioning is that classical conditioning involves associating an involuntary response and a stimulus, while operant conditioning is about associating a voluntary behavior, raising your hand without talking without raising your hand, and a consequence. So in operant conditioning, the learner is rewarded with an incentive. If you do the right thing, you get a consequence for that, which is to go outside. In operant conditioning, the learner is rewarded with incentives, while classical conditioning does not involve any enticements. Classical conditioning is passive on the part of the learner, and operant conditioning requires the learner to actively participate and perform some type of action in order to be rewarded or punished. For operant conditioning to work, the subject must first display a behavior that can either be rewarded or punished. Classical conditioning, on the other hand, involves forming an association with some sort of already natural occurring event. I hope that makes sense. And I hope you learned the difference between the two. And I appreciate you taking your time to listen. And I hope you now understand the difference between classical and operant conditioning. Remember, continue listening to other episodes to learn more about operant conditioning and all that it entails. We also offer group sessions, academic coaching. We have individual and group sessions to help prepare you for your test. If you're interested, you can reach out at drpm2020@gmail.com. That's drpm2020@gmail.com. And you can view all of our services at academiccoachingforworldchangers.com. Also, you can find many free videos that we post on YouTube, and be sure to subscribe. And that way, you'll get notified of all of our new content. Remember, it's a reading test, and you got this.